Good afternoon, everybody. I am Jen Fagan-Fry. I'm assuming most of you know who I am, but if not, I am the NOAA IR Manager and a scholarly communications librarian. I am here housed in the NOAA Central Library. So this is probably we're going to call it second in sort of an ORCID series that we kind of set up ad hoc. We didn't plan on turning this into a series of webinars and informational sessions, but we've gotten a lot of questions. There's a lot of movement around persistent identifiers, ORCIDs especially, DOI. So what we've opted to do is sort of establish this as an informal series. So an ORCID at NOAA series to kind of complement our traditional publishing at NOAA series. So this will be our second installment in this. And what we're going to do today is talk about creating and maintaining your ORCID. Specifically, we're going to focus on affiliations and some of the ORCID services that the Central Library is offering or can offer to you. As Shannon said, please feel free to enter your questions at any point in time into the question panel. I will get to them at the end. If you have downloaded the handout, you'll see there's a ton of slides. We aren't going to go over all of them. There are some supplemental ones at the end, which I'll address those when we get to that point in the presentation. So with that, let's talk about what ORCID is. I'm going to briefly go over this because I think most people are familiar, but ORCID is a persistent identifier. It is an identifier for researchers. Within ORCID, you can see someone's affiliations. You can track and list your research outputs, so not just publications, but data sets, your peer review activities. You can even list funding sources in your ORCID. ORCID as a company is a nonprofit organization that was created by the larger research community to support open science across the board. It is sort of the big name when it comes to persistent identifiers for researchers. It's widely used within the publishing and research communities, and it does offer a great deal of interoperability with other identifiers. So researcher ID or Publons through Clarivate, Scopus Author ID, which is a product of Elsevier, International Standard Name Identifiers or ISNIs or ISNI, some people say, Google Scholar. It works with all of those identifiers and talks back and forth to those. So if you have one, you can easily create and update the other ones. An ORCID itself is a 16-digit sort of randomly assigned number. It's system generated, and it can be expressed in one of two ways. There's the number itself in this example, or there's a full URL. Typically, it is preferred to express or present it as that full linked URL. So there's a number of benefits to having an ORCID, and I'm not going to go through these in great detail because Sarah and I did go over this a few months ago when we did our initial ORCID webinar. But the key things to take away from this are, if you have an ORCID, obviously the biggest benefit is to disambiguate you and your works from someone with a similar name. ORCID does provide name control and flexibility for you. So over time, you can sort of control how your name is perceived or searched across all of your research products, especially if there's a name variation. So I have a maiden name and then my hyphenated married name. In ORCID, I can control all those variations. Within ORCID, it does increase your visibility and discovery. It can save you time and reduce administrative tasks. These two things sort of are tied together. If you have things in ORCID, ORCID is integrated with a number of systems. We're going to go over that in a minute, but it can also auto-populate things because of that interoperability. In addition, within ORCID, you have the ability to allow for trusted organizations, which we are definitely going to talk about in a few minutes, where a trusted organization can sort of help you manage and populate your ORCID ID, which again saves you time, reduces burdens on you. And then obviously I just already talked about the interoperability. So ORCID has this principle of enter once, reuse often. So there's on the left-hand side here, there's this really nice diagram that ORCID has created that sort of shows the flow of information that happens with your ORCID. So you can link a lot of things together through your ORCID. So first here, we'll just kind of follow through this diagram. First, what you would do, say we're submitting a paper or something, right? First, what we would do is we would use our ORCID to authenticate with, let's say we're submitting to Wiley as a publisher. So we would use our ORCID information to authenticate our identity with Wiley when we're submitting. They would then collect the ID and include that with all the metadata for our publication. It would become part of the display of that article on their webpage. The display itself would link out to your ORCID record. So if someone wanted to see other works that you had written, other data sets, anything like that, they could click on that icon on the webpage and it'll take them out to your ORCID so they can see all that information. This authenticated ID is also used to verify and link up your affiliation information, so your NOAA affiliation, or if you're affiliated with a contract company, a university, something like that. So once all of those linkages are established, the publisher system and ORCID can now synchronize, and the publication could be automatically added to your ORCID profile if you have provided DataCite or Crossref trusted organization status, or if you have provided NOAA with trusted organization status. That's that synchronized part. So systems, once they have that ORCID information, can read and write back and forth to your ORCID profile with your permission. So that brings in that interoperability, and integrations is another term that I may throw out that sort of references that compatibility. ORCID integrates with, I think it's 12,000 different integrations across multiple organizations, institutions, publishers, funders, other services. So by funders, we mean research organizations or other government entities like NOAA, Department of Energy, publishers like Elsevier, Wiley, databases, indexes. All of these things work and have direct linkages to ORCID to read and write information back and forth, to share that information and to authenticate your name and your ORCID identity. So here on the right-hand side, I've listed just a few of the systems that are integrated with ORCID. I'm going to call out just a couple of them because we're going to go into depth a little bit more in some of these. Ringgold is an organizational identifier database that is used primarily by publishers. It is related to ROR, which is the Research Organization Registry, and also GRID, which is the Global Research Identifier Database. But in addition, ORCID also integrates with Crossref, DataCite, PubMed Central. There's numerous places that ORCID is integrated. So when you establish an ORCID, you, as the researcher, the person whose profile this is, has the ability to control the level of visibility. So there's 3 levels. There's the public, so everything in your ORCID is available for folks to see. That would be your affiliations, any biographical information that you've opted to provide, your works, your any grant information, peer review work that you've added on there. All of that information would be accessed publicly. There's the option for trusted parties or organizations. So that means that not everyone could view all of your ORCID profile information, just those that you have granted access as a trusted party or organization. And then there's private, where only you can access that information, only you can see it. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about setting up and registering for your ORCID, but I'm going to spend a bulk of this time on proper affiliation for NOAA within ORCID and how to set that up. There's some nuances to it, and I think a lot of people have questions as to how to do it appropriately. So first, we'll start with registering. Again, I'm going to go through this quickly because I feel like most people probably have an ORCID. It's a pretty straightforward process. You can get to the register link just straight through ORCID's main webpage up in the top corner. it'll bring you to a screen where you can either sign in or it'll ask you to register there. You can see on this screen, there's this option for access through your institution. That's one of those integrations I was talking about. Currently, NOAA does not have that capability, but it is something we're working towards. So keep your eyes open for that. But if you go into register now, what it'll do is it'll ask you to create your ORCID ID. So you'll put in all your information, first name, last name, primary email, you get to confirm your email, any additional optional emails that you'd like to have tied to your ORCID. And then what ORCID will do is do a quick cross check. And in this instance, you can see that this person who's trying to register has a similar name to a couple other people within ORCID. And so essentially, ORCID will throw up a message saying, hey, we found similarly named people. Are these you? Do you already have an ORCID? Let's make sure. And so you can verify that. And then once you've determined, no, that's not me, I need to set up my own ORCID, you can go through, create your login credentials, your passwords, and then it's going to move you into your visibility settings. So that's what we just went over, whether it's a public profile, trusted organizations, or private. You can select whichever one. I will say we recommend doing public. The point of this is for people to be able to find your works, find your data set. It's all about transparency. So making it so that everyone can see that information is key. I will caveat that with the information that they can see is in relation to your profile information, not like your email or any of those type of things. We're talking like your affiliations, your works, your data sets, your peer reviews. Those are the things that people will publicly be able to see. And then the key thing when you're registering is you do need to verify your email address in order for your profile to be fully established. So then once you have it established, here's a very basic, brand new researcher profile within ORCID. So you can see there's nothing in there. So now you can start setting it up. And the first thing that you'll notice on there is employment. This would be your affiliation. So I'm going to spend quite a bit of time on affiliations because that's what we wanted to focus on today. Affiliations, you'll see it's listed as employment. Affiliations can be your employer, can be your academic institution, it can be your degree granting institution, whatever it may be. So for folks in NOAA, there's a couple different options as to how we would recommend folks establish their NOAA affiliation. The first option is what we call all-in-one. So ORCID, when you are setting up your affiliation in ORCID, what you're going to do is search for your organization. Ideally, what we ask and recommend folks to do is list their organization as NOAA, not GLERL or National Weather Service, but as NOAA. When you go into ORCID and search for NOAA, you're going to get a couple different options, and depending on how you search, you're going to get additional options, and I'll explain why in a second. But the key thing to remember is there is one particular iteration of NOAA that is considered the authoritative official NOAA affiliation within ORCID and within the other persistent identifiers for organizations. And that is the one I have circled here, the one that is listed as NOAA Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, Washington, D.C., District of Columbia, U.S. That is the proper NOAA affiliation. Now I know most people don't work in Washington, D.C.'s, the NOAA offices in D.C. I don't, I'm in Silver Spring. So immediately I think, oh, I should go to, one of the other ones. I mean, obviously there's one right there that says NOAA Central Library. You would think that's the one I'd go to, but that is not the official NOAA affiliation. This is the one that you should select. Once you select that, it'll open up a broader window where you can edit information. So even though it said Washington, D.C., what I can do is go in and change it to Silver Spring, Maryland, or, Asheville, North Carolina, wherever you happen to maybe located. And then, because I do still want to make it clear that I am with OAR and under the Office of Science Support and that I work in the Central Library, I can enter that information in the department area. So here you can see this person. We've done National Marine Fisheries Service, National Marine Fisheries Economics and Social Analysis, something, with their role and their title, and then you can put in your date information. The reason we want folks to use that particular iteration of NOAA in the affiliation is because of this, what I have highlighted here, the ROR. Again, ROR stands for Research Organization Registry. ROR is an identifier for organizations. Specifically, we rely on it for funding organizations. It says that you are associated, it's essentially an ORCID for organizations, not people, right? And we want to make sure we're all affiliating, with the proper iteration of NOAA. This is NOAA's official ROR for us as an agency, an entire agency. We have it highlighted here, and I'll show you where you can find that information later too. But you can see how on this iteration, I have the appropriate ROR, but it's not saying Washington, D.C. anymore because I changed it to Silver Spring. And you can see I have all of my information in here with the NOAA Central and Regional Libraries, and that I'm the IR manager, so on and so forth, right? So that's sort of the all-in-one, right? We put all of our information into one entry. The second option for entering your NOAA affiliations is what we call concurrent entries. And I think most people will probably opt for this. This is actually how my ORCID currently is established, and you'll see it in a second. Essentially, what you're going to do is have 3 entries for your employment, and they will all be concurrent. You'll have one that is that official NOAA. You'll have a second one that is for your line office. And then you'll have a third one that's for your program or lab office. So in this instance, Chris is with NOAA, NESDIS, and CEI. So you can sort of see the progression here, right? There's 3 of those. So you would go in and identify each of these offices. So here's this same concept of concurrent entries also applies to contractors. So this is one of our library contractors, Jen Devine. She also works on the repository with me. So you can see here, she has they're not in order, sorry, but the first one is Office of Oceanic and Atmospheric Research. The library is part of OAR. She also has her NOAA affiliation with that high level NOAA option. And then she is, as I mentioned, a contractor, so her contract company is also listed in her affiliations. So the concurrent entries sort of cover all of those entities that she can be traced to. So briefly, the next step once you did your affiliations would be adding publications or data sets, adding your work products. I'm going to just blow through this slide really quickly. I do have additional slides about how to utilize adding adding work product with a DOI through PubMed, through BibTeX, or manually in the supplemental slides. Sarah did a really great job of going over that the last time. We've just repurposed her slides, but they are in the supplementary section just because we wanted to focus on affiliations today. So here, I will say that ORCID can support a lot of different work types, so not just journal articles, but data sets, reports, patents, software, things that you publish outside of sort of traditional scholarly publishing, like magazines, newspaper articles. You can put posters on there. You can put abstracts, conference papers, the whole 9 yards. It's quite robust. So the key thing about ORCID that we want folks to take away is once you've registered for your ORCID profile, you need to make sure that your contact and affiliation information is all up to date, and be sure to enter your works in a pretty timely manner. Again, I had mentioned earlier on, ORCID does talk to and work with things like Publons and Researcher ID or Scopus. So if you have one of those identifiers, you can have ORCID talk back and forth to that. So if you enter in one, it will update the other. So, it's sort of a enter once, reuse that information often. So in here, we have a couple links of how to do that. and how to automate adding your works to your ORCID profile. So I'm going to sort of skip over this part, but again, this is all available in the handout so you can access this information. So I want to talk a little bit about why we're focusing so much on ORCID and why there's been so much talk about it. The most pressing thing, a recent development in the world of ORCID, is the OSTP memo that came out in August of 2022. I have it linked here, ensuring free, immediate, and equitable access to federally funded research. A portion, specifically Section 4 of this OSTP memo, directly calls out the need for federally funded researchers to obtain a PID that meets the requirements of NSPM 33. NSPM 33 is the National Security Presidential Memorandum 33. It is all about research integrity and transparency. Within NSPM 33, it calls for folks to have who receive federal funds for research must have a persistent identifier attached to their research publications. So there is implementation guidance that lays out sort of requirements of what that PID should do, how it should be used, and where it should be displayed. And this is where ORCID comes into play, right? It is part of that scientific integrity requirement in Section 4 of the OSTP memo. So of all of the persistent identifiers for people, ORCID is currently the only one that meets those standards, which is why we focus on ORCID. Does that mean folks have to have an ORCID? No, but it is the one currently that meets those standards. It doesn't mean that there isn't something else that will be developed down the road. If folks have a researcher ID, we can utilize that. It just isn't going to be quite as interoperable as an ORCID is. So in response to both NSPM 33 and the OSTP memo, the Central Library has joined the US government ORCID consortium. The consortium is made up of, I think we're at 20 federal entities that are all utilizing ORCID. There's a number of benefits to it. The library has covered the costs for us. But with that, we receive 5 API keys so that we can integrate with ORCID at multiple points throughout our publishing and data processes. So the library currently serves as the main POC for the consortium. Specifically, I am handling that right now. So if folks have questions about it, you can feel free to contact me. But in addition to sort of having those keys, those API keys for integrations, we also get a lot of tips, tricks, tools. We work closely with the other federal agencies to ensure we're getting the most out of ORCID and getting the most out of this membership. So how do we plan to use ORCIDs within NOAA? There's 3 main ways to authenticate, display, and connect. So in terms of authentication, we are looking at how we can set up an integration within both RPTS and the NOAA IR submissions process to incorporate ORCID into that submission process where folks can authenticate with their ORCID right off the bat. They'd be able to link their ORCID information to their submission directly from step 1. In terms of display, we actually are working right now to display ORCIDs in the NOAA IR. So when you submit your publication to us, we would get your ORCID information as well, and then we'll have that lovely little icon next to your name on the landing page and search pages in the repository so people can link out to your ORCID. This will actually be live in hopefully December is the goal. Additionally, most publishers now are also including that same ORCID linking on their websites. And then in terms of connecting, this is sort of that interoperability and speaking to other systems. NOAA is looking at the ability to read and write to folks' profiles on their behalf. So this is where that idea of trusted organizations comes in. This is something where you as a researcher would have to grant us permission. Again, once you grant someone permission, you as the researcher always have control and can revoke that access at any point in time. So that's key to remember. But if you were to grant permission to the library, that would give us the ability to pull information down from your ORCID, so a list of your publications. It would also provide us the ability to update your ORCID profile with new publications. So say you submit a tech memo to the repository. Instead of you having to go into your ORCID account and put that tech memo in there, we could do it for you on your behalf. So, or say you have a new data set that you archived with NCEI. Long-term, NCEI could push that information to your ORCID on your behalf. So it reduces, long-term, it can reduce the burden of you having to go in and constantly update and maintain and add a new work product every time you have it published or every time you archive it somewhere. Excuse me. So one of the key things that we are starting in on and testing out right now is what's called Affiliation Manager. This goes with our consortium membership, but essentially it's a tool from ORCID that would allow us as a consortium member to update your affiliations on your behalf. So we in the library could manage your NOAA affiliations for you. So instead of you having to worry about going in there, searching for the proper ROR ID, making sure that you have the right one for NOAA and the right one for GLERL and OAR, we could do it for you. So the benefits to this is making sure you have appropriate affiliations improves the visibility of your outputs. It also can means that you're sharing accurate and authoritative information about your affiliations. So again, it's making sure the correct RORs are associated with you and your works, and it reduces that administrative burden because you don't have to do it. We can do it for you, and we can do it en masse, and we have a systematic way to do it through those APIs. The permissions that we would require in order to do this would also grant us the same permissions to read and write to your ORCID profile. So it's sort of a 2-for-1. If you give us permission to do one thing, we can actually do all the things. So how this would look is you would receive an email from the IR account. In there, you would have a unique link that would take you to essentially this authorized access form that I have here. So I have granted NOAA, the library, permission to update and read and write from my ORCID profile. And this is what I received. You can see here it lists all the things that you would be granting NOAA permission to do. So get my ID, read your information, update, add and update your research activities, your works, affiliations, update other information about you. And so with this, I just selected authorize access, and then you can see here there's a confirmation, and it just links. This is the account, this is the ORCID that you have provided access to NOAA as a trusted organization. So that's my ORCID that's listed there. And then you can also see this in your ORCID settings. There's an option in there for notifications, and you'll get a whole notification, and it'll tell you that who has added things and what they have added. So this is where I have updated my own affiliation through our affiliation manager, and you can see what they've added and how they've done so. So this is what it looks like on the front end. This is from my ORCID account. You can see that I am listed with OAR and NOAA, and you can see the source. The source, normally when you enter something is your name. Here you see it says National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, Affiliation Manager via ORCID member portal. So the benefit in having it say that means we as an agency are sort of hitching our wagon to you and saying, yes, this is one of our researchers. This is someone we work with. You can trust their information because we as NOAA are standing behind it. The other thing here, this may look a little crazy, but I wanted to highlight within your own ORCID profile, you can look at your trusted parties and see who you have listed as a trusted organization. So here you can see I have NOAA, and I also have on here where you can see where you can revoke access. You are able to revoke access at any point in time. I just want to stress that you do still have control over all of this information. So when it comes to trusted organizations, you could have NOAA, but when it comes to adding publications, adding data sets, you can also provide trusted organization access to places like DataCite, Crossref, again, other academic institutions that you have worked with or worked for. They would be able to do the same thing where they could post information to your ORCID profile on your behalf, specifically like add a data set, add a publication, so on and so forth. So that brings me to some of the resources we have for related to ORCID within the library. Something Sarah and I had launched a while ago, but we have since updated, is our ORCID for Researchers LibGuide. I have the link here. I think Shannon has it as well, and she can share that in the chat for everybody. In here, we have a number of different tabs. There's information and tips, resources directly from ORCID, and videos about how to set up your ORCID, how to manage your ORCID, all those sorts of things. But we've added a couple new things. I've added a new Managing NOAA Affiliations page, and that's going to be under Register and Manage Your ORCID, where it sort of talks about what we went over, like how to put in your NOAA affiliations, either the all-in-one option or the concurrent options. And then we've also added a tab all about organizational identifiers, specifically RORs. And on that page, what you will find is a full listing of all of NOAA's official RORs. So any ROR that is associated with a NOAA entity, these are authoritative, official NOAA identifiers. Additionally, in addition to the guide, we also have our weekly office hours. So within there, you can come and talk to us about the repository, publishing in general, ORCID, 508 compliance. If you have general reference questions, please feel free to stop by. This is every Tuesday from 2 until 3:30 p.m. That's Eastern time. Although, if you can't make it during that time and you still have questions, you are always welcome to contact us through the repository email. You can always contact me directly if you have questions about ORCID or any of those things. I'm always happy to help. So that is the end of my main slides, but I am going to just skip ahead for a quick second, and then we'll do some questions to the supplemental slides, and I'm just going to blow through these super duper fast. I do have a couple slides in here about putting in NOAA affiliations for cooperative institute partners. And then this is what I was talking about. I have, Sarah has created these, a nice long and detailed sort of discussion on how to add publications or data sets to your ORCID. So there's quite a few slides here that folks can go through. So with that, I'm going to go back to the questions screen. Shannon, are there any questions?